On this episode of Law Weekly, we bring you some of the highlights from the recently concluded 17th Annual Conference of the Nigerian Bar Association section on business law, which had the theme, The Nigerian Business Landscape, Priorities for Law, Policy and Regulation. The conference, which spanned a period of 3 days, brought together lawyers in the Nigerian business and commercial law community, professionals from other walks of life, academics, businessmen and women, the media, and many more. This is the opening ceremony and welcome dinner, which kick-started the program. Welcoming guests to the event, the chairman of the SBL, Dr. Adeoye Adefulu, says the timing of the conference is apt, as conversations from here will form the basis of dialogue with the President Bola Tinubu's administration.
Our chosen theme for this year's conference, the Nigerian Business Landscape, Priorities for Law, Policy and Regulation, is not only timely, but also sets the stage for a progressive dialogue with the new government. As we grapple with the challenges of rising unemployment and escalating cost of living crisis and the exodus of young professionals, popularly known as the Japa syndrome, it has become evident that inclusive and rapid economic growth is the need of the hour. To achieve this, we must holistically reevaluate our economic policies, along with the laws and regulations that underpin them. Our conference aims to dissect these critical priorities and present practical solutions for the government.
The president of the Nigerian Bar Association, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Yakubu Mekiao, harps on the need for the country to depart from complex regulations and embrace long overdue amendments in the laws, which will strike the right balance for a strong economy.
I employ all speakers, participants and discussants to bear in mind that Nigeria is in dire need of a departure from complex regulation, bureaucratic red tapes and bottlenecks which have historically constituted a burden and disincentive to all economic actors in Nigeria, thereby hurting the economy. Striking the right balance between the regulation and/or reforms and economic growth are pivotal to a strong national and, I dare say, a regional economy. It is my hope and expectation, therefore, that we will rise from this conference with workable proposals that can present before the relevant policymakers with the hope and aim to influence the laws, policies, and regulations that will see to the improvement of the business landscape in Nigeria.
The keynote speaker for the evening is the Nigerian country director of the World Bank. He spoke about the role of the global institution in helping countries around the world build inclusive and sustainable growth for all of its citizens. Having previously served in this capacity in locations like Afghanistan, China, and Indonesia, he couldn't help but make the comparison between those economies and Nigeria, and why Indonesia in particular, which shares the same demographic, geopolitical, and other features as Nigeria, has leapfrogged the latter in almost every economic and human development indicator. He concluded by suggesting ways of converting the country's enormous potential and the pockets of excellence into national economic growth.
No country has succeeded in eliminating poverty, getting on this kind of virtuous trajectory where everyone is lifted up without three basic things. First, and then this is where all of you especially come in, is ensuring law and order and kind of the basic rule of law in the sense of good governance. So without that, without security, without the rule of law, no country has managed to hit on that trajectory. Second is investments in people, in human capital. If you look at many of the countries in East Asia that have gone on this trajectory, on this upward trajectory, what distinguished them was the human capital. It's not the human capital that all of you have, it's the human capital that all Nigerian children have. And that's the second thing. And those two things, this rule of law, law and order, the fundamentals of governance, and investments in human capital, are the foundations for the third thing, which in essence is what helps a country grow, the engine, which is unlocking private investment for job creation.
The Lagos State government on its part reiterated its resolve to continue to provide an enabling environment for businesses and professionals to thrive in the state.
I believe that one of the key ways that we can support businesses is by creating a favorable regulatory environment, developing policies and enacting laws that are tailored towards promoting growth, innovation, and transparency. Policies are powerful tools by which government expresses its intention to address specific issues of development and governance. Indeed, it is a window through which investors get to know the focus of government and also a guide to taking appropriate and profitable decisions that impact the society positively.
On Thursday, July 6th, participants were back for more insightful and intellectual conversations on topical issues concerning the future of financial services regulation, the Nigerian Startup Act, the impact of emerging technologies, closing the infrastructural gaps through public-private partnerships, and many more.
We must address the myriad of pressing issues and challenges faced by businesses operating in Nigeria today. We have all experienced the effects of the removal of the fuel subsidy and also are anticipating the market's reaction to the devaluation of the naira through the recent introduction of the unified exchange rate. All of this must be guided by a framework which ensures stability in the business environment and protects shareholders. Law, policy, and regulation, when effectively designed and implemented, creates an environment that's conducive to economic growth and development. The SBL was set up to support and promote best practices in business law and drive policy changes that enhance the business environment. This year's theme underscores our commitment to fostering a beneficial environment for businesses to thrive, recognizing that law, policy, and regulation play pivotal roles in shaping the trajectory of the Nigerian business landscape.
The first plenary session of the day had the theme, Transforming Nigeria's Business Environment, Unlocking Potential Through Legislative and Policy Reform. Panelists had a lot to say about the issue.
Depending on the particular business, depending on the structure of that business, its size, whether it's a micro, small, medium-scale enterprise, whether it's a large organization, depending on the sector it's operates in, you will find that they all have different obstacles that they will consider to be the most important. So actually trying to identify the most important obstacle that cuts across all the business is very difficult. Some would, depending on all these things, some would say it is it's infrastructure, power, and good roads. Others will say it's access to credit. Some would say it's finding the relevant skills they require for their businesses, and so on. So I think it varies across different sectors based on their size. But if I was to pick one or two that I think in general cuts across most businesses in Nigeria, I would say it is security, rule and law, and then policy inconsistency, which also creates that uncertainty that businesses have. When businesses are investors over the long term, they need to understand the policies of government, direction of government, strategies of government, and when there's an environment of inconsistency, it's difficult for them to plan. And then I think another reason is I think if these three things are fixed, if security is fixed, if rule of law is fixed, and if policy consistency is fixed, I think that most businesses are able to navigate the other challenges I mentioned a lot easier. They'll find a way to work around it.
Following from what Dr. Kale had said, he talked about policy inconsistency I would also say opaque policies, right? You could see over the last few years the opaque nature of distribution of foreign currency, right? That really inhibited a lot of purchase of raw materials by lots of industries. Again, with the new regime and the new policies on FX, we hope that will be fixed because now we have a market, and hopefully distribution of FX should be more efficient. I dare say also that high interest rates, this regime of high interest rates also is inhibiting growth. Interest rates of 15 to 20%, makes production uncompetitive. And that really, as the inflation goes down, needs to abate.
We need to be able to distinguish two things, what our imminent problems are and what the important problems are. So what we tend to do as Nigerians is that all of us are very short-sighted. And so we think of our imminent problems. Whatever you step out into, there's a problem, that's the only thing we tend to focus on. So yes, we have issues with interest rates, foreign exchange, insecurity, rule of law. Those are big issues. But if we want to talk about the medium to long-term solutions of all the issues we have, it becomes impossible not to throw in education. Because at the end of the day, education is the only sector that feeds every single sector. And if you get your educational sector wrong, then the output of education becomes the input of every sector, from the lawyers to the doctors to the bankers to the engineers. And once you get that wrong ab initio, you are not going to be able to get anything right in the next 2 or 3 generations. So, while one, I would say yes, all those things we've listed need to be addressed imminently, but the important thing that I've not seen us focus on as a nation is the educational sector. And so that for me would be crucial. And again, lastly, when I say education, I'm not referring to schooling. There's a distinct difference between education and schooling. The evidence of schooling is a certificate. The evidence of education is an improved society. So if you look around, whether we're educated or not becomes very obvious.
Policy can't stay at federal. Then they don't implement. Theirs is to make those policies. But if you do not carry along the states in policy making, then fundamentally there's an error. The Land Use Act needs to be unbundled, 100%. It's not functional. Thank you. The Land Use Act is actually an albatross. And the ripple effect, the ricochet effect is what you see at state level, where go and see the index, go and see the metrics that are measured for ease of doing business. Property rights, title is one of the biggest. And that's why you see states like Lagos and Ogun on ranking coming 20th, 19th, 21st. A lot of people, a lot of businesses are cited between Lagos and Ogun states. But I have interfaced with businesses and I see their frustrations.
At the end of the conference, the leadership of the SBL says that they are committed to ensuring that the suggestions and recommendations made here go beyond being just a talk shop.
Typically, what we've tried to do differently this year is to drop what we call an implementation tracker. So, but to do that, for that to be effective, we've then decided that out of this conference, there must be some critical pain talking points, which we will put on that tracker and then monitor its implementation. And part of that implementation will be that by the next conference, we'll be bringing the various stakeholders back into the room to then ask difficult questions as to where we are with all the various laudable objectives that we set to ourselves, or solutions we provided during the conference. Thankfully, so far, we've had a lot of regulatory sector input in the conference, and they've made some very interesting suggestions, which we think are very actually low-hanging fruits that we can have, that we can see implemented in the next 1 year. So that document will be part of what will form the basis for next year's conference. So what we then will do is to make sure that we will then spoon feed these suggestions into the system and then come back in a year's time to tell everyone, we said A and B will be done in the first 6 months. So far, this is where we are. if there's a need to extend the period of implementation, then we will. Thankfully also, as a body, we have collaborations with organizations like NGX, NSG, so we're able to build traction and to have conversations at the government level and at National Assembly level. So putting all those into the picture and into our document, we'll find a way to make sure that we track this implementation policy.
Thank you for staying tuned. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission has listed legal jurisdictions across countries as one of the challenges it has identified in the fight against cybercrimes in the country. This is the submission of various speakers at a one-day media training organized by the Commission for Journalists in Kwara State.
Without doubt, the task of keeping a tab on our works are both engaging and odious. Engaging because the Commission has been profoundly impactful in combating the menace of corrupt practices in our midst, going by its impressive record of conviction, asset forfeitures, and other tangible proofs of accomplishments over the year. Economic and financial crime remain a threat to our individual and corporate progress. It is not only by being a victim of these crimes that we suffer loss. We also suffer limitation when our neighbors, our colleagues, institution, and nation fall prey to them. It bears reiterating that as journalists, we owe our nation and the entire world an obligation of exposing every shoddiness and criminal act through our reporting. Journalism is the best gateway to whistleblowing, and I charge the media to deploy more time, energy, and commitment in exposing all in our midst.
For 2015, cyber crime was not a crime in Nigeria. It was, upon the enactment of this Cybercrime and Prohibition Act of 2015, that cyber crime as a term became a crime. So in those days, we were using the advanced fraud section, and then we'll charge you for stealing. So even amongst our neighbors in Africa, they have issues of laws or passage of laws. As I speak, in the West African region, not all the countries have passed Cybercrime Act in their own jurisdiction. So in the event that monies from cybercrime move to a jurisdiction they don't have that law, it's not a crime in their place. Somebody just dashed the money. So it's so for you can't compel them to repatriate the money or even find the offender and prosecute him according to extant laws. And then because of that gap, not until recently we subscribed to the there's this international law that borders the entire globe. We just subscribed to it. It's not more than 2 years ago. So up until that time, there were issues of nomenclature of criminality that you can work with or even share information. So each nation is entitled to their law, and they are independent. So they must not work with you. So, but if they will be common grounds where their legislation and yours, have mutual, interest, and then you can work with them. Some are faster in, expeditiously responding to your request. Some are not. So and then for them, sometimes, if for instance a place like UAE, if monies go there, if the government of UAE doesn't work with you, that money can never come back. So these are huge issues that are there. That's where you begin to understand that there's something called the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. They begin to invoke which section applies to this, and this takes a very long time.
And just before we go, let's quickly do a recap of some of the top trending stories from the courtrooms.
We begin with the report that the Supreme Court has upturned the conviction of Senator Peter Nwaoboshi, who represented Delta North in the 9th Assembly. The Apex Court ordered his immediate release from prisons. Delivering the judgment, the court also freed the 2 companies that were tried with him on a 2-count charge brought against them by the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, EFCC, on the grounds that they were unjustly and maliciously prosecuted. In a split decision of 4-1, the Supreme Court set aside the July 1, 2022 judgment of the Court of Appeal, Lagos, which had reversed their discharge and acquittal by a federal high court in Lagos. The EFCC had accused Nwaoboshi and his companies of illegally acquiring a property named Guinea House on Marine Road in Apapa, Lagos, for 805 million naira, a property said to belong to the Delta State government. They had claimed that part of the money paid for the property was transferred on behalf of Nwaoboshi, adding that the funds were believed to be proceeds of their illicit activities. A federal high court in Abuja has granted a 50 million naira bail to suspended DCP Abba Kyari in a charge in which he and 2 of his siblings are accused of failing to declare assets to the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, NDLEA. The NDLEA had filed the 24-count charge against Kyari and his 2 siblings, Mohammed Baba Kyari and Ali Kyari, in respect of which they were arraigned in June. In his ruling, Justice James Omotosho granted conditional bail to Abba Kyari at the sum of 50 million naira with 2 sureties in like sum. Justice Omotosho adds that the sureties must have property worth 25 million naira within the Federal Capital Territory, among other conditions. The judge held that even when Abba Kyari meets the bail conditions, the endorsement of his release warrant is subject to developments in a sister case before Justice Emeka Nwite of the Federal High Court, Abuja, in which he is being tried with 4 others on alleged involvement in dealing illicit drugs. In Yola, the Independent National Electoral Commission (INEC) has filed a 6-count charge against a suspended resident electoral commissioner in Adamawa State, Hudu Yunusa Ari. INEC spokesman Festus Okoye said in a statement on Thursday that the electoral body took the action after reviewing the case file from the police, which established a prima facie case against Yunusa Ari. The court has fixed Wednesday, July the 12th for commencement of trial. In Lagos, a federal high court has ordered the remand of a Ponzi scheme operator, Bamise Ajetumobi, who has been on the run since 2021 over an alleged 7.5 billion naira fraud. Justice Chukwujeku Aneke made the order after Ajetumobi was brought before him and arraigned on a 12-count charge made against him by Men of Force Criminal Investigation Department, FCID, Alagbon, Ikoyi, Lagos. The defendant pleads not guilty. At the arraignment, the prosecution counsel, Morufu Animashao, from the legal office of the 4th CID Annex, Alagbon Ikoyi, told the court that the defendant conspired with his wife, Elizabeth, who is still at large, and their company to lure victims with a fraudulent 10% return on investment. Those allegedly defrauded by the defendant and the sums received from them includes Mr. Olawale Lawal, from whom 1.5 billion naira was received, Mrs. Kate Omu, from whom 500 million naira was received, Mr. Ehi Catherine Ojobo, from whom 2 billion naira was received, and another Mr. Abioye Idris, from whom 3.5 billion naira was received. The prosecutor told the court that the offences committed by the defendant contravened sections 8 subsection A, 1 subsection A, subsection C, and 1 subsection 2 of the Advance Fee Fraud and Other Fraud-Related Offences Act 2006 and were punishable under section 1 subsection 3 of the same act. And we round off at the tribunals, where the Independent National Electoral Commission has closed its defense in the petition filed by the Labour Party after calling one witness at the Presidential Election Petition Court. At the resumed hearing of the petition filed by Labour Party and its presidential candidate, Mr. Peter Obi, the electoral umpire called one Lawrence Bayode, a director in the ICT department of the Commission. The witness, who admitted that some of the results tendered were downloaded from INEC's portal, also said under cross-examination that the results of the presidential election released by the commission are authentic. Lawyer to the Labour Party, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Patrick Ikweto, disagrees, saying the results cannot be authentic when they are largely unreadable.
And that's the program for today. If you missed any part of it, you can find it in past episodes on our YouTube channel. Do also give us feedback via any of our social media platforms. I'm Shola Sheyeli. Thank you for watching and see you next week.